which is north of New York City. It's a very scenic place, and it has a lot of architectural history. And over the years, as I developed as a photographer, I began photographing these places, and it started to really gain more and more interest and momentum for me as an artist to photograph these places. And Carbon County developed in 2017. I was an artist in residence in 2015, and then I returned in 2017, as I said. And because I always wanted to return there, because I was so struck with the natural beauty of Wyoming, and also the history, specifically in this area of Wyoming that I was working, called Carbon County, which is in southeast Wyoming, near the Medicine Bow Mountain Range. And the name itself, Carbon County, originated from the coal deposits that were found in the region. And these coal deposits during the 1860s were mined to fuel the steam locomotives and the railroads that were being constructed across the United States, which obviously culminated in the Golden Spike at Promontory, Utah in 1869. So the name itself, Carbon County, kind of references the industrial history of the country, in which I really liked that aspect of the title because of that reference, but also it seemed to have sort of a metaphorical quality, because in the United States, we're always looking for carbon, in the sense of we're always looking for resources and places that we need to fuel our expansive nature. And the idea of manifest destiny was, for better or for worse, was underpinning a lot of my work as I was photographing this project. And the resulting publication was published last summer, in the summer of 2019. And I worked with Satara Press of Richmond, Virginia. And we decided to create this publication that wasn't necessarily just a book. It was more of a statement in of itself. So we decided to reference the earlier photographic portfolios of Ansel Adams and Strand and Weston, that American modernist photography history of the mid 20th century. So we created this folio box, which contains 24 signed and numbered photographs, which are the Carbon County photographs. And so when you sort of open it up, there's an entire so all letterpress details, an essay, and these are all the 8 by 10 inch prints that are signed and numbered in the box. All of these can be seen on the website. I'll put the link in the little text box below so that you can take a look. You know, obviously this isn't the best way to see books, but just want to get you a sense of the project. And a lot of these photographs kind of reference that the social history of Wyoming and the American West, as well as the current history and the current social climate, because it struck me as interesting because a lot of the people there still live a life that seems today kind of anachronistic in a way, because the cowboy life and the idea of the cowboy is still very much important out there. And in the photographs, you'll see that I captured a little bit of that essence. And as you look through the photographs in the boxes, about 14 by 14 inches, you'll see in the project that the cowboy is one of the themes that reoccurs throughout the photograph, the sequence of photographs. So you'll kind of see him reappear in different forms as the typical cowboy, the cattle drive cowboy. You'll see the cowboy as the executive. I have one photograph in the project of a man wearing a very, very clean shirt with embroidered details on the cuff, and he has a name tag with his name and his company. And this is kind of like the idea of the executive cowboy, which is the current cowboy. He's not necessarily a traditional cowboy on horseback, but he's kind of living the Western ideal of the cowboy, embodying kind of the myth of the cowboy. And he's in there. You'll see several other photographs that reference that. Some of the other themes in the project are the landscape and the horizon. Being from New York City, I grew up going on a lot of road trips with my parents, and that extended into my work as a photographer. So I love being out in the world and experiencing different places and learning from the places that I actually visit and see and interact with, as well as the people that I meet. And I'm very much influenced by the work of social geographers, namely John Stilgoe and J.B. Jackson, who write about the built environment. And in a lot of their works, they go out and they kind of go through the landscape and see these places, these American places, and really through their visual experience, they deconstruct it and they write about it, and it's really quite interesting. And that their writing pretty much underpinned quite a bit of my work. And I didn't mention it, however, I do have a background in political science. I studied political science, so that I kind of bring a lot of that to my my work as a fine art photographer. Yeah, and then in addition to the folio box that was published by Zatara Press, in an effort to make a more affordable option for people to buy, because the folio box is on the more expensive end of things, and we wanted to make an affordable booklet for people to purchase, as well as for me to use when I go back to Wyoming and Carbon County in the foreseeable future, as long as this virus ends at some point. I plan to go back and host some workshops and host an exhibition there to kind of give back to the people of Carbon County. And so we created this newsprint booklet that has the entire sequence of photographs that are found in the folio in a newsprint. Oh, it's like kind of like an oversized newsprint form, which has been very quite popular with my audience and with people that we've met at various shows and exhibitions. We did the New York Art Book Fair last year, the LA Art Book Fair, as well as APAD in Manhattan, which is the photography exhibition. We were in the book section, and which was a great way to share the work with a lot of different people, and it was quite well received. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how long I spoke, but I think is that.
I got questions.
Okay.
Let me get you going. I'm curious about who wrote the essay, and how did you find the person who wrote the essay for
The essay here. This is written by myself.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Essay, yeah. So.
Did you entertain the thought of getting anybody else to write about it, or did that just not seem viable, or?
No, we didn't really consider that as much. I don't know. I had written, I mean, a lot of my work, as I'm shooting, and specifically as I was shooting out in Carbon County over the summer of, 2017, I was reading about the history of these places and the history of the wagon ruts and the history of the Overland Trail, how people had this pilgrimage across Wyoming and they struggled to get to Utah and California, and that history kind of really resonated with me. And so I just started writing about the place and how I felt and how I, what I thought about the pictures. And so when we were developing the book, I kind of, Andrew Fednack of Zatara Press, we were working together as it's a collaboration with Zatara Press, my publisher. So we worked together, and he liked the text that I had written in Wyoming, which became the essay. And so we just decided to use that. So, yeah.
And those are inkjet prints that are tipped in?
Yeah, inkjet from so they're from large format film as well as 35 millimeter. So it's the first time in a project where I kind of mixed the looseness and the agility of like the handheld camera with the more deliberative large format camera. So I kind of combined both those qualities in the project, which I kind of like because I think it gave it sort of an interesting flow and dynamic to the sequence of photographs.
And what was the edition size?
The box, the folio boxes, was edition of 50 with 2 artist proofs. So and we did a Kickstarter last year to help fund the production of the project, which we met our funding goal for that, which helped produce the entire project. And we do have several still for sale, so you can check that out on the website. It's edition 50, and the booklet is open edition.
Where would they go, John, if someone was interested in purchasing?
Say again?
Where would folks go if they're interested in purchasing?
Oh, Zatara Press. Let me try to put that in there. It's yeah.
They're a great small publisher. They do some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, how do you spell that?
It's in the chat box.
Do you see it? Zatara.
Where's
Yeah.
Okay.
You just Google that and it'll come up. Yeah. They're a small publisher based out of Richmond, Virginia. So.
Are they easy to work with?
Yeah, very easy. Very easy. I mean, I had to travel down there a lot, so it wasn't that convenient, but no, it was good. I like Richmond a lot, so it was fun.
So I have a question. There's a lot of ways now to produce books, not just a traditional book that you would find in a library, something like that. They have accordion books. They have all kinds of different styles, but they all have the pages, at least the ones I've seen, all the pages are connected in some way, and you really have a box here of photos, sort of like Arbus's 10 photographs.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you call this a book?
It's not technically a book. I mean, there's the book aspect, which is the print booklet. So that's since that's kind of like it's a book. But I mean, it's not. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's up to debate whether it's a book or not. But
no, it's not. It's just a question. You know, I like what you did. And the box presentation looks really beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I'll look at. I can look at the actual individuals online, I would assume.
Yes, you can go to the Zatara Press website, or you can go to my website, and I also have a gallery of all the images on there.
And do I have is your website someplace that we could look at, or?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, great.
Once I'm finished. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Who was that? Who just asked?
Oh, it's me, Jim.
Oh, Jim. Okay, great.
Yeah, Jim McInnes is the last name.
All right.
Yeah, I've done a couple of books myself, but they've been self-published through Blurb, and I'm looking at some other alternatives instead of using Blurb. I like the quality of the Blurb books, but
yeah,
I'd just like to have something different. Blurb books, or if I wanted to sell anything through Blurb, I mean, the cost to me is, $100, and it's hard to sell a book from an unknown photographer for $100 even. So.
Right.
Okay.
No, the quality of those is pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Zatara is very creative in their presentations.
Yeah, I like that. I really like the book. It looked great.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Anybody,
John.
anybody else have anything for John?
Yeah, I have a question. Was this portfolio box your original intention when you started on this project, or did you have a specific original intention when you started shooting in Wyoming?
To be honest, you know, I was just so enraptured by the place and just in the process of photographing it and just trying to capture as much out there as I could in photographing the project, and writing about it and just being present to it. I really didn't have an idea of at that point when I was shooting, you know, what I wanted it to be in the end. Zatara Press we had been friends for a few years prior to that. And we started collaborating, and he knew that I had a pretty strong collector base from the past, from the past 5 or 6 years. I developed a pretty good collector base. So we wanted to create the box in a way because it did appeal to that, that base of mine. And I really liked the idea of the folio box too, because it has that substantial quality. It feels very earthen. It feels very heavy. It feels like, the mountains and the Great Plains. And, when you see the box, it has kind of this Japanese shahi book cloth on it. It's like a copper tone to it. And in the end, I just really loved how it references the landscape in Wyoming itself. Like when you open it up and you look through the photographs, and I think in a lot of ways it has more expressive appeal than like just a book in some ways,
Sure.
So I really like that. And
Yeah, jump in here. The ability to actually hold the individual prints in your hand, it gives you a different experience, tactile experience than a book does. I mean, they're both tactile experiences, but with the photographs, you can order them the way you want. You can lay them out on the table, look at them. I mean, it's a completely different experience.
totally, yeah. I mean, I have some collectors who said, they bought the box and they asked if it's okay if they could take them out and like frame them. And I'm like, sure.
Sure. Yeah.
The idea is each of the prints, we had over 1,400 prints that I had to sign and label each individual one. So the amount of work that went into this time is just like mind-boggling,
So
yeah.
Real
Sorry,
quick. Yeah. So each of the photographs in the box are signed and numbered.
Yeah, each photograph in all 52 boxes are signed and numbered. So in the event that they get separated from each other, they can be traced back to the box. In the case you're like with archives or librarians, so they can
Right. That's very cool.
back, and that goes back to kind of the the traditional folios of the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the project itself?
Of course, yeah. Shoot.
Is coal still mined there?
No, most of the coal fields in Carbon County have pretty much been finished and mined out.
Played
So
out.
most of the coal mining is farther up north in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming, up near Gillette, Wyoming. There's quite a bit of mining there. But most recently, the industries in Wyoming have been taken over by a lot of fracking, natural gas fracking. A lot of the coal industry is actually declining a bit because our use of carbon as a source of fuel is actually declining. So there's been some economic impact up there for coal jobs. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the when you go through Wyoming, a lot of the places you'll see in Carbon County, you can still see that residue of the mining industry, like the town of Hanna, Wyoming, which was built along the original Union Pacific Railroad, is still there, and it's an old coal mining town, and there's a monument to very, very horrendous coal mining disaster around 1900 that's still there up on the mountaintop. And so there's still that residue there of the towns and places of the industrial history.
What's the demographic in the county today?
Mostly white, I'd say. Mostly white, yeah. And there is in terms of economics, there's a certain section of in Carbon County. There's a certain area of Wyoming which has quite a bit of tourist ranches, like high-end luxury dude ranches, where a lot of people go from the East and West Coast Chicago to kind of experience like the idea of like the dude ranch and the American West. So there is a small selection of very rich people in that section of Wyoming, kind of like Jackson in a way, but Jackson's more of a winter kind of area, whereas Carbon County is more like summer because of the natural landscape. Carbon County itself in the winter gets extremely cold, 60-mile-per-hour winds, like sub-zero temperatures. So pretty much everything shuts down during the winter time. But there is that dichotomy between a select few of very wealthy people and more of the the working class, I would say.
I have a question.
Thanks.
My question is about the cover. You've got a buffalo on the cover. What was your thinking behind that? And is that symbolic to the county? And it's also interesting that you didn't have a photo on the cover of the box.
Yeah. Well, the buffalo, throughout, we really, it took a while to make a decision on the cover. Was a lot of debate, but the buffalo itself, it does reference the natural history of Wyoming. A lot of the photographs in the project, it's kind of about it's not really about wildlife, but the bison on the cover kind of references that history of Wyoming that in many ways has been, superseded and displaced by, the United States' expansion westward and pretty much the annihilation of the American bison in the landscape. So we wanted to kind of put them on there to reference that history. It's also the state symbol of Wyoming, on the flag is the buffalo. So I really like that symbol of it, and so. Yeah.
I have a question also. I'm actually listening from Laramie, Wyoming. So hi from out west. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your editing process in determining which images went into the book.
Mm-hmm. The editing process, again, it was very much collaborative with Satara Press. We wanted to, first of all, we got all the pictures I took over 200 photographs, and we printed them out as 4x6 inch prints, and then we just went back and forth and just tried to narrow it down, slowly by slowly, kind of separate kind of the wheat from the chaff. And a lot of the pictures, I had so many memories tied up with them, either because I spent so much time trying to get the right light and weather for them, and other times they had kind of an emotional attachment because, I like the subject matter. But it was quite challenging in that regard to, get rid of all the images that I liked, to just narrow it down to 24, which is something I struggle with as a photographer, is to narrow it down to the essential points and to tell the story. But in the end, I think, Zatara Press and myself, we came out with this sequence of photographs that really kind of comes together, I think, in a pretty tight way, and kind of tells a story of, the cowboy and the landscape, and the current social climate in that area is, with respect to the beauty of the place and the landscape.
It's always hard to let go of your emotions when you're editing.
Say again?
I say it's always hard to let go of your emotions when you're editing your own work.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to ask a question about the finances.
Yes.
Did Zatara Press invest any money?
Well, they, I mean, it's, I'm not sure if I could speak to that necessarily. I'm not sure, it might be a confidential topic for Zatara Press, but I'm not sure if they want to divulge that. But we did do a Kickstarter campaign in 2019 that, so I was able to fund the production of the project. And concurrent to that, we were also doing a whole circuit of different art fairs and selling the book and the folio box. So that helped fund the finalization of the publication printing. So.
Mhm.
And did Zatara Press help you with the Kickstarter, or did you have to do it on your own?
Yeah, we did it together. Yeah, we filmed it as a team, and Zatara, he's in the Kickstarter video as well. So we did it together. It was under their name that they did the Kickstarter. So
Good. Okay. Cool.
yeah.
Okay, if we've got nothing else, we'll move on to Forrest. Thank you very much, John.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
So you want me to take over?
Yep, it's all yours, Forrest.
Okay, let me share my screen. Come on. Okay, does everybody see my screen with my book cover?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Saturday afternoon. My name is Forrest McMullin. I've been a photographer for a really long time. I was a commercial photographer based in Rochester, New York for many years. And as an adult, went back to school, got my master's, my MFA, and as soon as I got it, I was hired by the Savannah College of Art and Design to come teach photography at the Atlanta campus. So in 2008, my wife and I reinvented ourselves and moved to the South after being Northeasterners for all of our lives. And it was a massive change, but a wonderful change in many ways. In 2016, I got a small grant from SCAD to fund travel for a project. And it was right after the 2016 election, and I was surprised and concerned by the outcome of that election. And I wanted to do a project to try to document or discover people who voted for Donald Trump. And over the years, I've used photography as a means of exploring people who are different from me. So I've done projects on men and women with extensive cranial and facial disfigurement, and I've done projects on African-American rodeo cowboys and men and women involved with the BDSM lifestyle. And I always I unlike some photographers I have great respect for, I have no interest in exploring myself. I have a great interest in using photography as a means to learn about something or some people who are different from me. So I started out traveling through the back roads of the Deep South, and assuming that the pictures would be primarily portraits, as most of my previous projects have been. And the second day out, I saw this image that's on the cover of the book in Roanoke, Alabama. And I was really stricken by the beauty and the design and the color and the textures of this burned out building in the downtown of Roanoke, Virginia. And I started seeing things like this all over. And so the project changed very quickly from what I thought would be an exclusively portrait project to be a project that ended up being probably 15 or 20% portraits and the rest other kinds of pictures. Hold on. This is one of the opening spreads. The book was published, it was released this past January 2020. It was published by the Rochester Institute of Technology Press in Rochester, New York. And these are just a few of the representative spreads. Excuse me. When I included portraits, every one of the portraits, there are 10 portraits in the book. I included brief written profiles of the people in the portrait. And so you may be able to read this depending on your device, but I'm going to read it to you. It's a brief little vignette about Charles Jenkins II. I was driving along a back road that skirted the edge of a swampy lake, Lake Bruin, just west of the Mississippi River. I almost didn't see the small sign as I drove past. Taxidermy. Of course I stopped. It appeared that the shop was in an outbuilding, and when no one answered my knock, I started walking back to the car. "Hey, buddy," Charles called from the porch of the house. "What can I do for you?" He took me into his shop and showed me around. Lots of heads and skins and blood and fur and feathers. He had been around taxidermy his whole life and had learned most of what he knew about it from his father. He said business was excellent, with customers finding him from all over the country. He had taken only 3 days off in the last year, and he needed a vacation. "How's the fishing in the lake?" I asked. "Not bad, although I don't get out there too often. You have to be careful because of the alligators." "Really?" "Oh yeah. One time my girlfriend was leaving early for work and she drove over something that felt like a log. She got out to look and screamed. It was a 12-foot gator. I got my gun and shot it in the head." "Did you save the meat?" "No, I can't eat gator. I've skinned too many of them. They smell awful, like some nasty cross between rotten fish and cooked cabbage. I can't get that smell out of my head enough to eat their meat. I took that gator and dumped it over the levee a few miles from here." This is a field in northeast Louisiana. These are both in far eastern Georgia. So I did a trip in December of 2016, and after looking at the photographs that I had, I decided that I realized that I had been on an exceptionally long period of cloudy days, and the book felt relentlessly downbeat to me. I mean, I was photographing people in places that whose economics had suffered over the previous few years, and to photograph all of them on these cloudy days really was kind of depressing. And so I went back in December of 2017, and this time got lucky and had a lot of beautiful weather. And the difference between photographing a rusty sign on a gray day and a rusty sign on a beautiful sunset day is enormous. This is a father and son and a family friend at a gravesite in waterproof Louisiana. So the book came together. What happened was I came back from these trips, and I had a huge volume of work, 5, 6, 7,000 pictures. And in many of my previous projects, you could look at 5 or 10 of them and have a pretty clear idea of what I was doing, because there was a consistency in point of view and of proximity and of the type of work. And I soon realized with this work in Late Harvest that you needed to see a lot of pictures in order to understand how I felt about these places and how these places existed in space and in time. And so it seemed to me that a book was really the only way to tell that story. And so I had a residency. There's a residency program in Northeast Georgia called the Hambidge Center. And I had a residency, and I printed out 175 or 200 4x6 prints. And I brought them to my cabin in the woods, and I spread them out, and I started moving them around and editing them and realizing which ones were redundant and which ones were not as strong as others and which ones went really well together and which ones needed to stand alone. And I edited it into a book. And somebody, in a question to John, asked about blurb. And I used blurb. I ended up printing about 6 different blurb copies of this book before I was satisfied with the edit and with the sequencing and the sizing. And it wasn't until I had that final blurb copy that I started sending it to publishers. I also felt that the pictures weren't, they didn't have an immediate commercial viability. And so it seemed to me that university presses were a better way to go. I talked to a couple of commercial photography book publishers who said, yeah, it's really nice stuff, but you know, I don't know how many people want to look at pictures of peeling paint in Nowheresville, you know, Mississippi. But there are a number of universities and programs in the South that specialize in Southern studies. And so I approached several of them, and I got several rejections. And then I approached the Rochester Institute of Technology, and they held on to the PDF layouts for, you know, 4 or 5 months, 6 months. And eventually I said, listen, I have this this blurb copy, can I send it to you? And I did, and they immediately picked it up, that seeing it as a living, breathing, physical item sold them on the idea of publishing it as a book. And in fact, the RIT, the truly published edition, is virtually identical to the blurb edition. It's 11 by 11 instead of 12 by 12. The blurb was 12 by 12, and they published 11 by 11. And they redesigned the text pages. But other than that, they used every bit of my sequencing and my design and my sizing of the photographs, which was very gratifying to me. So here's my contact information. The book sells from the RIT Press for $60, but if you order and put SEC4P book deal in the subject line or in the Venmo memo, you'll get it for $50. And I will also donate $5, 10% of that sale price, back to the Southeast Center for Photography. So, and we can come back to this later if you want. I'm going to take it off the screen now and open it up for questions. Okay? Anybody need me to leave it up for a minute? Okay.
Forrest, this is Alec.
Hey, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Long time since Rochester days, eh?
Yes.
So looking through your book, I noted obviously the fact that you shot a lot on cloudy days, and I was kind of wondering if there was a statement there, but it sounds like not. It was just the weather.
Yeah.
But I also see that sometimes you kind of bring the saturation up and other times not so much. And I was wondering if there was, thinking behind that, or how that fit into your kind of creative view of the book.
I never desaturated for any reason, unless the picture itself was oversaturated. And the photographs pretty much appear as the way I remembered those places. So there are some that are virtually monochromatic, and there are some that are just like crazy colors, like the cover. The cover is crazy colors. But that's the way that place looked. So no, there was no, if there was a particular color that I felt looked like day glow, looked just too fake, I would back that off a little bit. But most of the colors appear as my memories, as accurate to my memories of those places.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Anybody else?
I have a question, Phil Balin. In looking at your photographs, they're beautiful and impactful, but I was kind of surprised because of your opening remarks saying that, you know, you were struck by the 2016 election, and then you decided to go and kind of visit the area to see what it was all about. And it strikes me that that your choice of fewer people and portraiture was interesting, as opposed to more of the landscape types of pictures. Plus, the interview, at least the one that you did with the taxidermist, is fascinating, but it really didn't touch on politics at all. So what changed as you went through this? What made it less people-oriented, and what took the politics out of the final work? I'm just curious about that.
Well, I think it was a result of a response to the places that I saw. I didn't expect to find places and spaces that had such distinctive personalities. And so that really overshadowed the possibility of it being a portrait project. And then I also realized that the politics weren't as interesting to me as I thought they would be.
Okay.
That the people were much more interesting irrespective of their politics. And the taxidermist is actually a really good example. He's one of the few people that I really talked politics with a lot. And that's because he, for whatever reason, thought that I might be a liberal. I might be a Democrat. And he was thrilled because he didn't get a chance to talk to many Democrats. So he got really excited. So he and I talked about politics, but virtually nobody else. That has been has carried over. I've actually already photographed a follow-up to Late Harvest called Bridge and Border: Opening Appalachia, and it's the same kind of working method as Late Harvest, but all in the Appalachians. And I really avoided politics with those people. And one of the stories that I did for the Appalachian book is, I think it's a really great story. It's this wonderful guy that has a boxing gym in a tiny town in Kentucky, and he works really hard. And I was thinking about politics after I had been back for like 6 months, 4 months. And I sent him a text and said, "Hey, I'm just curious. Are you a Trump supporter or not?" And he wrote, "Trump supporter all the way." And I thought, for a second, there was a part of me that thought, eh. And then I thought, no, it doesn't matter. The politics ultimately aren't the most interesting part of most people.
Right.
That there are a lot of other parts of people that are more important and more interesting to me than politics. That's kind of a long answer.
No, that's great.
Question.
That's great. Thank you.
So I have a question on, you started off saying that you made 5 or 6 versions of the blurred books before you actually landed on one that you liked. And I was wondering, were you making smaller versions of those as your proofs? Because the 12 by 12s are about $80 each just for 20 photos. So
yeah, they were expensive. No, I made them 12 by 12. I wanted to know what this thing was going to look like. The book is such a visceral experience, a physical experience. It's the way the paper feels in your hand. It's the way the pages sound as you turn the pages, the way the ink smells. It's all of those things. And it was really important to me to understand how this thing was going to function, that I saw it full size. When the earliest versions, I just did black and white printouts off the computer and taped them together and used alligator clips to get a really rough idea. But once I started to have some confidence in those early, really bad designs, I got them printed full, and they were expensive. They were, I mean, they were between 100 and 125, depending on the length.
Right.
So they were not cheap.
Yeah, but you can get the discounts that they put out.
Yes. Well, they were 175, but with a 40% discount, they were 100 or 100 and a quarter.
And how did you find the transition, if that's the right word, between the blurb book and the actual book that you had printed with?
The offset book, they were surprisingly close. Of the 6 or 7 blurb books that I got, there were maybe 2 of those where the reproduction was not great, where it was a little too contrasty or a little too dark. Ultimately, the published version looks better because we used a varnish on the photographs. And for those of you who aren't real familiar with printing, offset printing, they put down 4 colors to reproduce the color photograph, and then they laid down a 5th color, which is a varnish, which is glossy. So it's on a matte paper, and then the photograph has a glossy surface, so it tends to pop off the page a little bit. It looks really beautiful. So in that respect, it looks much better than the blurb copy.
Okay, and then since your book is offset, so did you have to because your blurb is basically RGB, basically.
Right.
So did you have to convert to CMYK?
Yes, and I did all the CMYK conversions.
So you did it in Photoshop. You used it.
Yes. Yeah, I converted to the CMYK. 90% of the photographs didn't need any adjustment. The CMYK looked identical. There was about 10% that I had to tweak a little bit.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I always wondered about that because it can be a real chore to convert.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and talking about the process, because somebody asked John, and my process was very similar with RIT. We had a Kickstarter, and our goal was $10,000. We ended up raising $11,700, so we could print a few more than we thought we were going to. And it was their Kickstarter under their name, but all of the information in it was from me. So we worked really closely as a team. The production of the book was not a collaboration like it sounds like John's was, but the Kickstarter and leading up to that was a really close collaboration, and I was thrilled to have them do it because they handled all of the fulfillment of all the Kickstarter rewards. So I didn't have to deal with any of the collecting the money or shipping the books or making sure that somebody had their book. Oh,
photographers from all over the world.
Oh, okay. So it was really nice having not having to do that all by myself.
Yeah, it's nice that they did the production and all you had to do was fill in the script, basically.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, to that point, was this your first book that you've published?
Yes and no. It's my first monograph. I worked on a book 4 or 5 years ago called Iconic, which was a history of Apple computer products. And I did some of the photography, and I was the editor and the producer of that book, working closely with an author. So I was familiar with the printing process and the design process. I'm not a designer, but I knew how all of that stuff worked. And so it is my first monograph. It's not my first rodeo.
And how many did they print?
450.
And how do they promote those?
They have a reputation as a small university press, so they sell it on their website. They run periodic specials. They have a big mailing list. I got a lot of books. In our deal, I got like 175 books. And so I sell them as well as I've sent them to curators and competitions and all that kind of stuff.
I see.
So, the publisher basically warehoused the books.
Well, my 175 are in my guest room.
Right.
But the rest
that you printed 400. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to add that I really like the integration of words into the book, and was wondering about your comfort level with words, with writing in particular, and also what does late harvest mean? Why did you come up with that as a title?
Sure. The first part of the question, although I consider myself a photographer, not a writer, I don't suck as a writer. And so I was pretty comfortable with that process. As far as I'm concerned, the weakest part of late harvest are the stories that I felt like, excuse me, some of the stories are a little bit thin and I wish they were richer. And so for the Appalachian book, I spent a lot more time with people, a lot more time taking notes. And this, as a result, the stories are much more compelling as far as I'm concerned, and have a lot more direct quotes. There are a lot more of the people and less of me. And so I'm pretty comfortable writing. I don't like to write. It's no fun. Photography is a lot of fun. Editing is a lot of fun. Graphic design, is not as much fun, but isn't too bad. Writing is painful for me. The only good part about writing is when I'm done with something and I can look at it. That I really like. So that's the writing part. The title, Late Harvest. Because of the time of year I was photographing, everything was brown. As I said, the first trip, everything was gray. And I was really surprised at how few of the towns I went to felt vibrant and healthy. I took the trip that I took was strictly random. I used a paper map, not GPS, and I only went on roads that were really skinny, and I only went to towns that had really small type. And so it was, except for Selma, I went to Selma, Alabama on purpose, but everything else was strictly random and serendipitous. And but because of the time of year and because of the state of agriculture at that time of year and the state of the towns that I saw, I felt like it was a little bit late for everybody. It was really all about a harvest that was past. There's still a possibility, there still is a possibility of a harvest, but it's really too late for a lot of these places. And that's what the title refers to.
Okay, because harvest does suggest some bounty. And it felt like that maybe you were alluding to that sense of renewal that you sensed in some of the towns, that things are still perking.
Well, and I think that that's part of the reason why the people pictures are so important, was to let you know that although the spaces that I was photographing were most often abandoned, there were still people in these towns. There were still people, struggling to make a living, struggling to get by, and struggling to figure out what their next step was. And so I think that is the bounty that I would refer to.
There's a question I'd like to ask about what you mentioned at the beginning when you were talking about your other projects. You had said that your desire in those projects was a more looking outward and looking at groups and looking at places. My feeling is that in a book like this or the work that you do, a lot of stuff is much more autobiographical than we might think. And then there was a comment that you made later on, you know, where I think it was when you were looking at the 4x6s and you said something to the effect of how I felt about these places. Do you feel like the book captures and encapsulates how you feel about, and I'm going to say specifically being a Northerner who has come to the South and lived and worked there, do you feel like the book captures what you feel, say, about the South and a certain strata of society in the South?
That's really hard. I think that I think that the contradictions that I've encountered in the South are much more dramatic than the contradictions that I lived with in the North. And so I think that's probably the most salient answer to your question. You know, I started out looking at the photographs that I took as formal exercises. You know, I was really interested in reducing surfaces to these geometric, abstract, expressionist, you know, things of color and texture and form. And but it wasn't until they were all together that something larger began to emerge, and this patchwork started to emerge. And I think that one of the stereotypes of the South that I think the pictures bear out is the connectedness to the land. That I think that Southerners are much, and this is a grotesque generalization, but nevertheless, that Southerners in general are much more connected to the land than Northerners. And I think that the photographs in some ways bear witness to that. It wasn't a stereotype that I was consciously looking to capture, but I think it's one that comes through. So that's, I mean, that would take longer to answer. That's a really, you know, yeah, but I think, you know, getting back to what John said too, I think that you know, the editing process, I did entirely on my own. And so it was constantly, you know, examining myself and my motivations and my reactions to places to try to figure out what was a good picture and what was a good memory, you know, because good memories don't necessarily make good pictures. And I think that, you know, that constant reassess, I think that's part of the reason why books need to take so long, because it takes a while to analyze all of those feelings and to figure out, you know, the best way to present them to the world.
It's not surprising, your comment about being connected to the land, since you've got industrial North and agricultural South. So,
well, and that's why the Appalachian book really interests me, because it is both a bridge between those two as well as a barrier between them. Mm-hmm. You know, and as a result, it has a really different personality than either of those places.
For your photos, they were digital or film?
100% digital.
Digital.
I haven't shot film since 2002 or 3.
Okay. Anybody else? If not, we'll wrap it up.
Quick question. What were your what were your beginnings as a photographer? When did you start? What what got you into photography, being an artist. I'm just curious about your origins, if that's all right.
In 1968, my father upgraded his 35 millimeter camera to an Instamatic. And he gave me his old 35. Instamatic was the one with the plastic cartridge you dropped in the back. And he gave me his Perfex 101 camera. And I immediately fell in love with photography. I was a freshman in high school. And the next year I got a job with the town photographer in Waterville, Maine, where we lived. And it's really the only thing I've ever done. I went to RIT as an undergraduate. I wanted to be a fine artist with photography. And after I graduated, I realized I was never, ever going to make a living as a fine artist. So I started doing commercial photography, and that's what I did. I did a lot of work for advertising, for magazines. I did work for Forbes, Fortune, Business Week, Time, U.S. News and World Report, as well as big sellers like Concrete World and the Chronicle for Higher Education. So I did all of that for many, many years. And then as I approached my 50s, the allure of schlepping 15 cases of equipment through airports and hotels and factories and offices lost its luster. And I was burned out after 28 years. And that's when I went back to school to get my MFA. That's a really short version. There's so many more details, but.
And your residency was for the more artistic, obviously, side of your.
I'm sorry, say again, the residency was what?
You had a residency you mentioned. I was just curious about that, what you focused on when you were in that residency. Did you mention that?
I've had a number of them at this place. It's the Hambidge Center, Hambidge. I've had some of them where I photographed. I did a project called American Flea that was portraits of the customers and vendors at rural flea markets, and I used Hambidge as the base, a base to go out from. The one that I mentioned was where I specifically did an edit for the book. So I brought all these little prints and laid them out and stuck them on the wall and edited down. And then once I had the sequencing, then I started putting it together in a design. So I've done, and then sometimes I just go and write.
So you promote your own work then in other ways?
Yeah, I do. I'm represented by a gallery here in Atlanta called Thomas Dean's Fine Art. But I do whatever needs to be done.
Okay. I want to thank Forrest and John very much for joining us today. It's been quite an afternoon, and hopefully we'll have them back again. Now, while you're here, next month, which happens to be July 18th, and both of our guests next month are visiting us today. We've got Lynn Buchanan, and we'll be talking about Florida's Changing Waters, A Beautiful World in Peril. And Ken, I hope I don't butcher your last name, Dreyfus Silent Stages. So hopefully we'll see you next month. Thank you all for coming today, and have a good weekend.
Hey, Michael, one real quick question. Will we get the invites automatically, or do I need to? I think I'm on the mailing list, but I'm not sure.
For now, we will send you out an email and then ask for you to respond to get an invite.
Okay, great. Cool.
Thanks
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Nice seeing everybody.
Thank you. It was great.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Wonderful.